Hi all, let's have a look at the game 6 of the amazing 20 games sent to me recently by Deepmind. So game 6, knight f3 from Alphazero, we have knight f6 from Stockfish, c4, c5, knight c3, e6, g3, queen b6. So the opening is very different here to other games that we've seen. We see d3 now. There is a stem game from this unusual queen b6. There's a stem game bishop g2, Rafael Vaganian against Onason, which was a win for white in 30 moves actually. Here it carried on like this with white playing for d4, and some very interesting tactics arose here after rook takes. Yeah, it was a very, very interesting queen sack, but it didn't quite pay off, it seems. White exposed some loose pieces there in the position and was now winning. So that was the key stem game that I found for this. So that was with bishop g2 here, but here Alphazero plays d3. We have d5, bishop g2, bishop e7, and now c takes, e takes, e4, d4. Now perhaps some of us just routinely, if we get this sort of position, perhaps we routinely play knight e2. I know that I have a tendency to do this with an idea that maybe later I'm going to castle, move the knights somewhere and play f4, maybe e5. It seems a little bit on the controversial side, visually at least, what Alphazero played here, knight d5. So this is offering double pawns on a plate, structural damage, and black obliges with knight takes d5, so e takes. So are these pawns important? Do they have subtle upsides? Well, one such subtle upside, and look out for this later, is this pawn is controlling c6 as well as e6. It is an advanced pawn in black's territory, and sometimes these hook squares can become quite critical later when things open up. So bear that in mind. And it's not that vulnerable at the moment. So Stockfish castles, Alphazero also castles, bishop g4, offering up the light square bishop actually. It seems otherwise an awkward piece in this particular pawn structure if it is kept on the board. So okay, let's run with this. h3, bishop takes, queen takes, knight a6. And now actually there's a kind of form pawn plan. I dare say, I have to say, it looks extremely like a form pawn plan because there's no knight on f6 to stop white from doing this kind of plan. And yeah, this pawn can be sometimes dangerous with d6 as well. So black has to be pretty careful about that as well. And plays the cautious blockading move, bishop d6. We have h5, and it's actually quite tricky here. If black plays h6 as an example, this didn't happen. It seems queen f5 is strong with the idea bishop e4, and this is very dangerous. For example, here bishop e4, and then the queen can install on h7, going to win that pawn anytime the king moves. For example, that's great, winning that pawn as well. And say here, well, otherwise it's just going to be very, very nice for white, building up on the e file. So that's to be avoided, it seems. Another possibility, just queen d8 again, is to be avoided. These possibilities with the queen on h7, it's very dangerous. White's going to be easily winning this kind of scenario. So this is why it seems h6 is a bit fatal, basically, on the light squares. So queen d8 is played, h6 allowing the form pawn. See form pawn t-shirt link. Okay, so form pawn is installed. What more can we say about this game? No. Let's carry on. So I think there's still some work to do. What do we want to do with this pawn? Ideally, well, one ideal is maybe to bring this pawn up to be connected pass pawns. Another ideal, especially if they're connected, is to unblockade later. So let's see, rook e1, knight c7. Here, if challenging the e-file rook, it seems taking and then bishop d2 gets white a very nice position. After queen f6, black's pretty tied down. This scenario, a3 for example, now waiting for black again. But white ends up getting a nice small edge. That's very passive for black. It seems very promising for white to build on this small advantage here. So knight c7, not daring to challenge the rook. Bishop d2, a5. Here again, if we look at rook e8 in this particular configuration, taking, it's just pleasant enough for white. Bishop f4 for example. Here queen e2, and now the deadly form pawn in this variation shows up. You know, if bishop takes f4 for example, queen takes e8 is going to be mating, so black has to be super careful. And after queen e2 and say king f8, bishop d2, white has a small edge. So okay, a5, a4, b6. Now note a small downside of this pawn move, it's not controlling c6, so that aforementioned advantage of this d5 advanced pawn echoes a bit stronger now on c6. In particular, that c6 square is a useful hook perhaps later. Rook e2, rook e8 finally now is played. Rook takes, knight takes, rook e1. We have rook b8, b3, knight c7, rook e2, and it's here that Stockfish plays in a way, it seems it's a difficult position because this bishop eyeing a5. The queen hasn't got too many squares, and there's liabilities, subtle liabilities in black's position. But rook a8 at least has a virtue that there's no unprotected piece, potentially, in important variations. The rook, this is, for the moment, it seems stable enough. Even though black's play seems without a plan, just waiting for white, it seems stable enough. We see king f1. It seems waiting for black to have a less than optimal configuration. Stockfish just puts the rook back. Bishop h3. Now, one point to note here is that this queen is continually on these squares, especially the f6 square. It's continually eyeing f6. That's an important point to note, because sometimes we might not want the queen eyeing f6. This, for example, if bishop f4, there's the useful queen f6 here pinning, or threatening structural damage. And if queen e4, king f8, black all of a sudden has a really quite decent position with maybe the option of rook e8 soon. So that's to be avoided. So this queen f6 is a nuisance if white wants to play bishop f4. So bear with that idea. We have bishop h3, which literally stops the queen from using any light square. Rook a8. Again, the rook isn't a liability on a8. Rook e4, rook b8, and it looks as though this is waiting for something very, very subtle to happen. Rook a8, bishop c1, rook b8, rook e2, bishop f8, which is looking at the d5 pawn here. Now this is protected with rook e5, bishop d6, rook e1, the bishop goes back, but the repetition is avoided here, bishop g2. So this is a bit Leela-esque as well, high-level shuffling. Maybe this is the way the neural networks work with MCTS. They're following lines which are promising and not necessarily the most optimal routes. But on the other hand, it gives opportunity for black to put a foot wrong. But how does black actually put a foot wrong? Now here, I believe I've identified something here about this position. you have to bear in mind the possibility of queen f6 on bishop f4. And what happens now in relation to that is important. Rook to c8. So instead of rook a8, we have rook to c8. If the rook had gone to a8, as an example, bishop f4, in fact, queen f8 might be sufficient. Queen g4, rook e8. This might be sufficient for an even position, as far as I can tell. But with rook c8, things are very different now. After bishop f4, this is now interesting all of a sudden. This is a very difficult position for black indeed here. Queen d7 was played. Now, if bishop takes f4, queen takes, black can't play knight takes d5. Let's rule that out because of queen e5 and now g4, and black's run into a sort of zugzwang here after g5 here, with that form pawn sort of helping greatly to create this zugzwang. If here, then there's this. If queen d6, then we just take on e8 and get the queen back with a bishop up. So this looks abysmal, these possibilities. Let's just run this through again. Here, on bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, queen f8, let's say, instead of knight takes d5, there's d6, and this is absolutely winning for white, this combination of the form pawn and other liabilities. For example, if queen takes h6, there's rook takes e6, winning that rook after, and it will be even with check after here, check, check. This is very dangerous for white's king. So that line, but let's have a look also more at this for a moment. Queen f6, bishop d5, then taking on e6 with the rook is crushing. Rook e8 is mating on g7, or f takes, bishop takes e6 check, and this is a winning endgame for white. Let's have a look at move 35. Instead of bishop takes f4 here, let's look at rook b8. There's actually queen e4 here. This is very strong. So for example, if bishop takes, queen takes, this is super strong. Knight takes, bishop takes, and the b8 rook is hanging. So let's say king f8. There's bishop h3 here, and now bishop e5 is strong. For example, takes f6, taking on d6, bishop e6. This is a very strong position for white with a load of pressure. f6 is attacked there, and this ends up being too much for black to bear, basically. This position is just cracking for black. The king can waltz in and take on d4 there. So all these variations, yeah, let's look at this one small, this queen f6 here. There's actually queen g4. Now that's one of the points associated with the loose rook on c8 here. So gaining a very key tempo. So if that rook moves, then the queen lunges in, and now this is mega dangerous. After queen d8, rook e7, this endgame is just winning with that rook infiltration. The black pawns are just dropping off here, double attacking a5 and c5. So that's nasty. And if knight f6, yeah, just rook takes a5 again. So all of these are roads leading to Rome, so to speak, after bishop f4. It seems, yeah, problematic that in some of those variations you saw that the c8 rook is a target to g4. So we have the move queen d4, and now this next move is very, very powerful all of a sudden and guarantees, it seems, a winning advantage essentially. Can you spot it? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, white to play here. Why is this position so important? You might wonder. So what does white play here? And Stockfish 10 also is able to find this move with white. Okay, it's g4. This move seems to guarantee winning endgames, basically. If white does anything else, say bishop takes d6, this doesn't promise too much. For example, here, there's knight e8. And black does seem to be having enough defensive resource with the pawns on dark squares away from the bishop. There doesn't seem to be too much trouble for black here. It seems even. But this move, it just guarantees, it seems, winning endgames, as far as I can see. If rook e8 was played, on bishop takes f4, queen takes, knight takes, queen e5 is devastating here because the knight can't even go to f6. It's not protected by anything. So that's double attacking d5 and g7. So that's just winning material here. Black can play that, but rook takes e3, still threatening mate. Yeah, it's hopeless. And here it's a nice way of winning with bishop d5 and queen g7. If we go back, instead of rook e8 for a moment, if bishop f8, g5, so holding on to the pawn pawn with that g pawn is important here. And now bishop e5, if knight takes, queen takes, that's not on. If rook takes, this is desperate. This is just desperate. Yeah, it's just winning for white, this scenario. These are just winning scenarios. So if king f8 here, g5, this connects up the white pawns, and the bishop can control the d pawn here. So these pawns being pushed in the center guarantees white a winning advantage. Basically, white has a big advantage. So very, very precarious position all of a sudden. So rook e8 was the chosen move, and then we have rook e4. So saying to black, are you going to really, sometimes connecting up the pawns will be useful now on rook takes e4. We have rook d8. In fact, yes, if rook takes e4, connect up the pawns, all of a sudden this pawn is now supported, and e5 is a big idea. And on f6, there's a winning move here in the form of g5, taking the breaks out, so liberate these two connected pass pawns in the center. So for example here, bishop takes, and then we're coming back soon for e5. Pretty soon it's going to be e5 time, or other stuff happens which is winning anyway. Look at this crossfire, queen in the center there, that's crushing. On bishop e7 instead of f6, g5, this situation where e5 happens, it's just crushing in the center. That's a devastation scenario. So yes, it looks as though black's really on the back foot here. We have rook d8, bishop g5. Now we have, so the rook's attacked, it moves. We have queen f6 threatening mate on g7. That's parried. But now a key point, queen c6 all of a sudden. That d pawn is useful. It's just cashing out. Literally, it's shaking black into a totally lost endgame by force, transitioning by force into a totally lost endgame position. Queen takes c6 was played. On queen takes d5, takes just taking on e8. On queen c8, we just take on e8 and then take on c7. So yeah, it's not too much to do here after queen c6. So queen takes, d takes. This position is very bad because not only this pawn's quite a menace, but this pawn is able to move. The other pawns are locked down. If you look at all of black's pawns, they're kind of locked. But this is the one free pawn in the position, which can charge into black's position and restrict the king in endgame scenarios. A double form pawn, you might call it. With the h6 pawn, we're going to aim for a double form pawn now. Okay, I can't get away from the form pawns. f5, g takes. Rook takes e4 is played. If rook c8, yes, double form pawn, f6, it really helps restrict the king in these scenarios. For example, rook g4 with the idea of bishop e4 is crushing. This is just going to take out h7. And then here we've got a winning h-pawn now on the cards. Just winning with that h-pawn. So rook takes e4 was played. Bishop takes e4. That's important. If d takes e4, then bishop e5, and then with f6, that's holding for a lot longer. If white, it might be a draw there. So bishop takes e4, bishop e5, f6, double form pawn, indeed. The endgame scenarios are just horrible now, because you'll also note that the king is as free as a bird compared to that one, and can travel on light squares potentially as well. So bishop f5, knight e8, the king comes up. Not mind, this pawn can't be taken because of this pawn now, so black's just waiting. Bishop c7. If knight takes f6, then bishop takes, and then just queening c7. So black's just waiting around now. Bishop c7. The king's just put in prison in this endgame. The king comes up, f3. Very interesting points about form pawns and an endgame here. If black tries to resist with knight d6, this position, bishop d7, the king is actually locked out potentially out of e8. And what white can do now is go into an opposite colour bishop ending. The double form pawn is absolutely winning here because, for example, king e4, the king swings round on the light squares, taking a left turn here, and then going up there to support the c pawn, absolutely winning. So that's a fascinating little bit of trivia here for knight d6. It just seems absolutely winning after bishop d7. After bishop takes f4, king takes f4, the game was actually ended here, adjudicated as a win for white. It's absolutely winning. If knight takes f6 as an example, the king can come to e5, and then bishop d7, and then king d6, and we're just winning like that. c7. If instead here knight c7, king e5, king f8, bishop takes h7, white has a big advantage. Also, white can even play c7, even allowing knight d5 check here, because this is still winning. The king just waltzes in and wins the queenside pawns, getting a very winning a pawn there. So yeah, and the endgame scenarios with that king locked up on g8 is all winning for white, it seems. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game video. If you did, please click on the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net. You can play against other YouTubers. You can also check the YouTube analysis in advance from the improved menu Learn for the Masters YouTube order button. Comments, questions, donations, see the description. Like, share, subscribes with the notification bell. All appreciated. Also check out the new Teespring store, which is in the description for details. You can get your form pawn and other chess t-shirts. Okay. Thanks so much.